Hey guys, welcome to the
Hi
BBYO
everyone.
Global Day of Jewish Learning. This is going to be a class about Satan and going to be led by me, Rabbi Meir, Tannenbaum, and Tali, Adler, and we're really excited to have you. So let's get started.
Hey Marni, we're really excited for this.
Me too.
Okay, so I think the format that we're going to use is I'm going to teach a piece, we'll take time for questions, and then Meir will take a piece.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So, Marni, what we're going to be talking about is the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
He's been viewed either as Satan or not as Satan in many Jewish sources. But what everyone can agree on is that the snake is a pretty bad character. Or what not everyone can agree on. Let's leave that an open question for now. Do you want to start by telling me about some of the questions that came up when you learned with Rav Zach?
Some of the questions that came up during our conversation were, first we started with why is it just a man at first? Why did it start with just a man? Another question was, why is the tree specifically just a tree of knowledge of good and evil? Another question was, why is it that just they couldn't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but they could eat of the other tree? And then why were they going to die if they gained that knowledge? There's also, why is it that the serpent said you can't eat or you should eat of the tree, and how are they supposed to know which tree it was anyway? So those are some questions at first.
So I think that those are really great questions, and what I love about them is a lot of it focused on what information do they have, what information don't they have, when do they have that information. And I think that that's a really great strategy for reading text in general, and that's a strategy that we're going to be using today. So can I ask you to read the first box of sources on the source sheet?
Yes.
This is from Genesis 2, verses 7 through 9.
Okay. The Lord God formed a man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the life, and the man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and placed there a man whom he had formed. And from the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle, and the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Great. So we've gotten some basic pieces of information so far. Who's the main character that we have so far?
The main character right now would be the man that God formed.
Exactly. And right
Or
now
God.
the man is the only human being in existence. He gets put in this garden. What else is in the garden? What are we told?
In the garden, there's the man that he formed, and there's the trees that are good for food or good to look at. There's a tree of life in the middle, and then the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Great. And both of those trees are where? The two trees that we got with specific names? In the middle of the garden.
Yeah.
Great. Let's read the next source.
Okay. The next source is from Bereshit 2, verses 15 through 17. And it says, the Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil do not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die.
Great. So I'm actually going to take a step back here and remind us that we're working with a translation. The verse 16, where it says, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat. Free to eat is one possible translation. But in the Hebrew, it's a little bit stronger than that. It says, achol tochal. It's a double language, and it's kind of insistent. Like, imagine a Jewish mother saying, welcome, come in, you're really hungry, eat, 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 eat. That's what's going on here, not just hey, welcome to my house, take stuff from the refrigerator if you want. Two totally different ways of looking at that. So that's why you always have to be careful with translation. But I also want you to keep that piece of information in mind, that this is actually I want you to eat all of this. That's one thing I don't want you to eat.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that? What's interesting about that command to you?
I guess it's like welcoming him, kind of tempting him, almost saying like eat, and eat, and he's saying eat of it, but he's saying don't eat this one. So it's kind of a mom telling a little kid don't eat this, and the kid's like, oh well, now I want to eat popsicle more.
Do you think it matters the way the mom phrases that sentence? Like we talked about two different ways of phrasing it. Either you can eat, but don't eat that, or please, look, I have so much food to give you. I have this great meal that I prepared for you. Eat everything. That's one thing I don't want you to eat. How do those two play out differently?
I think saying don't eat that one is almost saying like that one, and then the person will want to do it more, and saying like eat all this, like eat this, but not of that. I don't know. I think they're similar but different in the way that they're saying don't eat this or don't eat this and just kind of leaving it. I don't know. But that's just how I'm thinking about it, how there's similarities, but there's like a slight difference, and I'm trying to figure out myself what it is.
Great. Let's keep that in mind. One more question. What isn't mentioned in those sentences that we just read, in those verses?
What isn't mentioned? Eve isn't mentioned. The woman isn't mentioned.
Right, so she's not there yet. She's not hearing this command. She's not privy to the conversation between God and the man. What else is there?
The serpent isn't mentioned at all.
The serpent's not on the scene yet.
And the tree of life isn't mentioned.
The tree of life isn't mentioned. Great. So what do you think that means about the status of the tree of life?
It seems as if like it plays a big role, obviously, because they're the first human being on Earth. But I think that by not mentioning it, it's kind of saying like, oh, it's there, but it's not the main goal of God putting the garden. I guess I think this is kind of saying that the tree of life is just there, but it's not playing a huge role right now. Maybe I'm not exactly sure.
So here's a different way of phrasing that question. Do you think that we were given two categories so far? We were given please eat this and please don't eat this, or you must not eat this. Which category would you assume the tree of life falls under there?
Probably do not eat this.
Why would you assume that?
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking about it like don't eat this, but also in this, the way it's phrased is probably just please don't eat this, because he's not saying like don't eat from this tree, like you can eat of every tree except for the tree of knowledge of evil.
So let's move on for now. These are really important things to keep in mind when we talk about how the snake is going to frame this in his conversation with Eve. But I want us to keep in mind that the status of the tree of life seems kind of ambiguous at this point. Maybe it's because it's not important, or maybe it's because it really didn't fall under that rule of don't eat this. Or maybe it's not entirely clear. And we'll see how that gets taken advantage of. So let's keep reading. Want to take it away?
Okay, sure.
Great.
Next is from Bereshit, Genesis 2:25 through 3, verse 8. The two of them were naked, the man and his wife, yet they felt no shame. Now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the beasts that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? The woman replied, the woman said unto the serpent, of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is which is in the midst of the garden. God said, "You shall not eat it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." And the serpent said unto the woman, "You shall not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, and your eyes shall be open, and you shall be as God, knowing good and evil." And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and did eat, and she gave some to her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of both of them.
Great. Marni, sorry, I should have told you to begin with. So how does the snake start his conversation? And who does he choose to start the conversation with?
He first has the conversation with the woman. So the woman wasn't there in the conversation. So that's another interesting point. And he starts the conversation asking her a question about what God said. She wasn't there to have the conversation with God.
Yeah, and what sort of a statement does he make about what God said? Is what he asks about true? Is that actually a thing?
I guess it's not true because God never said that. God said you can eat of the tree except for this one. So I guess he's kind of changing the way the conversation went to someone who wasn't in the original conversation.
Great. And what's her reply?
Her reply is, "Of the fruit of the tree of the garden you may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said, you shall not eat it." So she says, you can eat all the trees in the garden except for the tree which is in the middle of the garden. Jesus said, God said you can't eat it or touch it, and then you'll die. You'll die.
Which part of that isn't necessarily true?
The part of touching, God never mentioned that before.
For sure. And what else is kind of ambiguous there? What did she call the tree?
Yeah, she says the tree is in the midst of the garden, and in the first text that we read, the tree of light and the tree of knowledge, and were both in the middle of the garden. So that's kind of ambiguous in the sense that we don't know which tree she's referring to.
Exactly. And I find this really, really interesting. She's limiting herself more and more. God started out by saying, everything is okay. I want you to partake of this. There is one thing that you cannot partake of. And she kind of expands on that. She doesn't entirely get it. She's adding, we can't touch it. And there are two very important trees in the middle of the garden.
Right.
Only one of them is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The other is the tree of life. And she thinks that they're both off limits. And what does the snake say will happen if she eats of that?
The snake says you will die, but your eyes will be opened and you'll be God, so you'll know good and evil. So he's basically saying, even if you do it, you're not going to die. You're going to gain more knowledge.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a little interesting because he's going against the word of God and basically twisting the head and saying, that's not true, that's not going to happen.
Do you have any ideas about why he's doing this? He's setting up a conversation where he's kind of telling half-truths to someone who doesn't have any information.
Right.
What's going on with that?
I think he's trying to tempt her into maybe eating of the tree and saying, let's see what'll happen. Maybe I can twist what's going to happen, change the future kind of, and say, in the sense of like maybe something else will happen and maybe I can have control of it kind of. So I'll change the way that God's doing out.
Yeah, I think that is a huge part of what's going on. And what really is interesting to me at this point is what's his strategy? He doesn't just go up to her and start a conversation with, God told you not to eat that, you really should. What's he trying to do during this whole conversation?
He's trying to kind of manipulate the conversation and say, instead of asking her questions and having her answer, he's kind of putting new ideas into her head. thing is going to happen, not that.
Yeah, so there's kind of this amazing irony going on. Here he is saying, if you eat from this tree, you'll get knowledge. You'll know more.
Right.
But he's doing this whole conversation in a way where it's actually depriving her of knowledge. He's actually taking the little information that she has, and that's a whole question about why does she not really know what the rules are?
Right.
And he's confusing it even more. He's telling her half-truths. He's implying that things were never said were. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
How does he make her feel like this is a really, really important thing for her to do?
He tells her that she'll be like God, that she'll be like the thing that created her, and that's a really big thing to become like. So that's important to her, and that's how he tries to sway her into it.
So I think that's one huge part of it, but I think there's also a subtler part of it. What does he try to convince her about her life in the garden? When he says, didn't God say that you can't eat any of the fruits? Or when he kind of nods along when she says, well, we can't touch that. We can not touch that tree, and also we can't eat of any of the trees in the middle of the garden. What's he trying to convince her?
That he can eat. I think that he's trying to convince her that she can eat of either of the trees, maybe. Yeah, I guess just the ability to eat from either of the trees in the midst of the garden, even though she right now is in the mindset that she can only eat of one of them.
Sorry, Marni, I didn't quite hear the last thing you said. Your sound cut out a little. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I said that maybe because he's saying that he specifies like this is the tree you can eat of. He just says you know the good and the evil. Maybe it's kind of tempting her into saying like you can eat both of the trees in the midst of the garden, even though in her mindset she can only eat of one.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great point. He's conflating those two things. He's adding in additional barriers, saying God doesn't want you to have this, and God doesn't want you to have this. And look, you can't eat from either of those trees. God said that. What do you think will happen if you do eat from them? I think that one of what we'll call Satan, what we'll call kind of that strategy of the thing inside of us or outside of us that often tries to get us to push boundaries, and boundary pushing is important. Forget what's actually already possible within the boundaries. It's important to push boundaries a lot of the time, but you can only really do that in a constructive way if you know all the things that you are already able to do within the system that exists.
Yeah.
So here's my question. What would have happened if she had eaten from the tree of life instead? That was the thing that was allowed for her. What would have happened?
To my knowledge, as reading all of these passages, I think that she just would have lived her life the same way as she had been living it. She would have been in the garden just eating it because that's what was okay. I mean, she was okay to eat any of the trees.
So,
sorry, what?
I want to just kind of put this out there. Maybe there was a way to get the extra knowledge and the extra ability that she wanted within the boundaries that she already had. The snake put out there a really important thing. You can achieve more. There's more than this in the world. But he only gave her one very specific way of getting to that, and that involved saying, I am going to break this boundary very explicitly. The question is left over to the reader of what if she had taken advantage of the things that were given to her? what would have happened if she had eaten from the tree of life instead? What would have happened if she was able to see that in the fruit and in the things that God said, this is what I really want you to have. Here, take it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my take on the story, and I loved learning it with you, and I loved hearing about your take on it. Rabbi Meir, do you want to jump in at any point?
I'm ready. It was such a fascinating conversation, but I'm ready whenever you are. Marni,
right,
is there any questions, or I should just go on and we'll continue the conversation?
I'm just going to remind everyone to tweet their questions to globaldaybbyo@gmail.com, and be answering those questions and sharing your comments with the teachers throughout this conversation. So remember to do that.
All right, I can't really hear, so I'm going to assume that I'm good to go.
Great.
Sounds good.
So I wanted to share with you perhaps like a slightly different take on Satan, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of just talk to the computer. I think I'm having problems hearing anyway. So I'll just hope that everybody can hear me, and I'll give a little, I think, hopefully an interesting understanding in this Satan, this character. So there's a famous, I think Reb Nachman meant it as a joke, when Reb Nachman of Breslov, the great Hasidic master, said that Satan was charged with, being Satan, being this evil spirit, evil force in the world. And he realized that there were so many people out there, such a great world, that he was overtaxed and overburdened. So he convinced God that he needs some help. So God said, fine, Satan, go ahead. Who do you need to help you? And Satan said, I'll tell you what. Let's appoint rabbis in each community, and the rabbis, they can take over some of my job. I found that a little insulting personally. That hurts right over here on my heart. I found that insulting. I don't want to think of myself as being Satan's aide, but I don't know that I think he meant it as a joke, and I want to talk a little bit about what I think Satan's role is, and maybe it's not all evil. Maybe it's also some good side to Satan. So the sources, I think the sources you should have. I don't know, is it up? Are we getting sources? But
we have them.
You have them? Okay. So I want to look at this book called Job. Okay, so Job, we know, is the book of suffering. It's a difficult read. It's got material which talks about how a person deals with having everything and then losing almost everything. And it's a painful, painful read. However, it's got a lot of insight into Satan, and I think got a lot of insight into human nature as well. So before we actually look at the book inside, let's talk for a second about the book, about Job itself. So the Talmud mentions many, many opinions when actually the book Job was written. I want to focus on perhaps the majority opinion. What we conclude in that section is that the book of Job is actually authored by none other than Moses himself. Our great teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, he himself appears to be the author of Job. Now that's very fascinating. Why would Moses need to write a book? Why is he authoring this book of Job? So the Talmud continues, and it's really the Vilna Gaon, this great rabbi from Vilna, who explains that the book of Job, written by Moses, is actually probably a parable. It may not be historically correct. It is perhaps a parable. What is the parable about? The parable is about how human beings deal with suffering. How do we actually know and feel, and what is the proper way for human beings to deal with suffering? Believe it or not, Satan is going to be the key teacher in how we as human beings should deal with that suffering. So, with that introduction, just one more point. Think about it. Why do you think Moses needed to give a parable for dealing with human suffering? What was going on in Moses' time? If you were live responding to you, tell me. Because Moses was talking to his Jews, to his people, who were suffering immensely under the Egyptians. And they needed a book, a guideline, a parable, someone to look up to, a role model, and how to deal with suffering. So Moses writes this book about this character, Job. Whether he existed or not, he serves as the parable, a paradigm on how human beings should be able to deal with, how to function amongst and amidst suffering. So now, understanding that it's perhaps a parable, let's look a little bit at the text, and hopefully we'll be able to glean incredible insights from this text. So if you have the sources in front of you, the verse tells us, introduction, the first verse of Job tells us, there was a man named Job who lived in the city of Uz, or Utz. I know there's a pretzel company, Utz, they make these big jars of pretzels, but I don't know that there's actually a place called Utz. I've never heard or seen on a map a city of Utz. So what is this city? Where is this person, this Job, where is this city of Utz that he lives in? So again, with our understanding, perhaps Utz is not a real place. Perhaps Utz comes from the word, it's actually based on a verse in Isaiah that says, Utzu Eitzah. Utz means to take advice, to take heed, to take counsel, to listen to the following advice. Meaning, already in the first verse, what we are being taught is, this book that's about to follow is all about taking heed, take advice, learn how to deal with suffering. That's the introductory verse. This fellow named Job lives in Utz, lives in a place where he is giving others counsel and advice. Okay, so now we continue on the text. The first five, from verses 2 through 5, I didn't put on the sheet, but they just describe Job's great life, how everything was just beautiful for him, family and friends, wealth. And then the verse continues in verse 6. So here's why I want to focus in verse 6, starting, and we're going to see a little bit about who Satan is by who he's not. Okay, so we're going to look at the verses carefully, and when we see it carefully, we are going to, when we see it carefully, we're going to perhaps find out who he's not, and then hopefully, at the end of the day, we'll find out who he is. Okay, so in verse 6, we're told, Vayihi hayom, it was that day, and Vayavo b'nei Elokim, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So these sons of God come, and who comes with them? Satan, Satan. Now, if I were Satan, I'd be insulted at what the verse writes about me. It sounds like the children of God came, and who else came maybe uninvited? Who walked in through that open door? Satan as well. But it sounds like, A, he's not invited, and it sounds like he's on a lower level. Everybody else is the sons of God, is children of God, and poor Satan, he's the uninvited stranger. He doesn't belong there, he was not invited, and he just walked in because the door was open. Okay, so far that's what we know about Satan. He's uninvited, and he's not the children of God. He doesn't have the relationship with God that the others had. He comes in unannounced, and it's not B'nai Elokim. He's not welcome near God. Okay, now let's look a little bit further at the next verse. The next verse says, and the Lord said unto Satan, May I and Tavo, from where have you come? Where have you come from? What's been going on? Where have you been lately? And what does Satan answer? Satan answers, I have come from going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down it. It's also not very flattering. It sounds like Satan is kind of homeless, kind of, just looking around without any intent or purpose, has nowhere to go, doesn't seem to be at home or comforted somewhere. So again, what we know so far about Satan is, number one, he is not a children of God. He is not really welcome. He comes uninvited. And the second thing we know about Satan is he has no home on this earth. He is walking to and fro, up and down, not really having a place to be. So that's what we know about Satan. We don't know who he is, but we know who he's not. He's not really welcome in heaven. He's not really at home. He doesn't really have a comfortable area. And that's who he's not. So now, what I want to look at is a little bit further. Let's see what happens, how Satan fits into the story. And hopefully we'll be able to then glean some information about it. As the story continues, God then says to Satan, Have you seen my my man Job? Have you seen this great person? He fears me. He's wonderful. He's great. He's an incredible follower, devotee to me, God. And so Satan says, "Oh, really? You think he's that great? Why? You know, of course he's great. He has everything." And God says, "Fine. I'll tell you what, Satan. You can test him. Take away whatever you want. Just don't harm him, and let's see if he still follows me." Meaning, Satan, you go ahead and test him. You go ahead and see how he reacts when things are not so good. Meaning, you're not convinced he's so great because he's able to handle blessing well. You want to test him and see how he handles unfortunate scenarios well. Fine, go ahead and test him. Okay, so now Satan is again this person who's not at home in heaven. He is homeless on this earth, and he is now the one who's going to test Job. So who is this guy? He ultimately tests Job, and Job struggles a lot, has a hard time dealing with the suffering, and then ultimately he comes back into believing God at the end. But let's see who this is. So we know who Satan is not, but who is he? Who is this character, this person, this testing presence who's not welcome in heaven? Who is he? The key to understanding Satan, maybe the key to understanding life, and definitely the key to understanding what Moses was trying to tell the Jewish people is to understand the following. Maimonides tells us is that as human beings, we are comprised of a spiritual side, we'll call it a Yetzer Tov, a positive inclination to do good, to be spiritual, to be a driving force to connect to God. And then we also have a negative side. The negative side drives us away from God, ruins our connection to God, makes us doubt or deny, and certainly distance ourselves from God. Obviously, it's much easier for us to harness our positive spiritual drive when things are good. It's obvious that we want to be close to God. We're grateful to God when things are positive, when there's light, when there's good times, prosperity and fame and fortune and prestige. And the difficult part we have is who takes over our bodies, who controls us when things are bad. And the answer to that is our negative side. Oftentimes when things are rough and we struggle, that's when the Satan takes over. That's when the part of us that drives us away takes over. Understanding that the positive side, the drive to be accepted, to be close, and to believe and to have faith in God, that's our positive side, our Yetzer Tov. He's always struggling with our inner Satan, not like Satan, as Tali talked about, as the snake, as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, but now he's metamorphosed into an inner battle, an inner struggle, something inside of us that makes us want to forget, wants us to deny, wants to not acknowledge God. And that most often comes when we struggle with things, when we're dealing with challenges, and we're dealing with things that aren't going smoothly, whether it's a sickness in the family, or God forbid, a death in the family, or difficult times. It's our inner Satan that tells us, oh, God doesn't exist, God is not helping, God doesn't do anything for us. That's our inner Satan that unfortunately is able to really, really be have a very strong and anti-God presence when things go rough for us, are hard for us. This is the most constant struggle that we have as human beings. Moses understood this. Moses understood, and he wanted to explain to us that there are B'nai Elokim. There is the Satan who does not belong close to God. He is uninvited. The B'nai Elokim, the children of God, are the sides of us that want to acknowledge, want to be close to God, want to thank God, want to be part and near to God. But there's also Satan who sometimes comes into play. Sometimes he may not be welcome in heaven because he doesn't want us to be there. He wants us to deny heaven and not be around heaven. But sometimes he comes into play. Sometimes he forces our hand. Sometimes he's very prominent and very, very strong. And this Satan has no place in this world. Unfortunately, he's there, but we can't give him place. We can't let him have power. We can't let him have authority and rule us and control us. And so God said, Satan, you think that Job's going to deny my presence. You think Job's going to fall prey to your strength, to your power when things aren't good? Fine. You test him. You see if when things go bad for Job, he still remains faithful to me, or he gives credence to you. He denies me. And this is Job's struggle. Job's struggle is the struggle to believe in God, the struggle to deny in God. It's the struggle, the inner struggle of, do I still acknowledge my faith? Am I still a believer and a faithful follower of God? Or when things are struggling, does Satan have the upper hand? My inner inclination to deny God is, does he now control me? This is what, as human beings, we struggle with. Moses looked at his people, looked at the Jewish people around him, struggling under Pharaoh, and the torturous, backbreaking labor and slavery, and they thought there was no hope for them in Egypt. Moses said, you need a paradigm, you need a role model, you need to look up to someone. Here's the someone. Look up to Job. Job had everything in life and then loses everything in life. And he struggles with his spiritual inclination and his inner Satan. Can he remain faithful, or does he deny God's presence? Ultimately, Satan is defeated by Job's belief. Job's belief remains firm, remains strong, and remains dedicated. But that's the struggle he faced. That's the struggle we face. We face this struggle every day in our lives. When things are not good, when things are difficult, when things are tough, we face this inner struggle. The lesson of Job, the parable of Job, stands to us forever as how to deal with struggling. Whenever we're struggling and going through difficult times, we need to look no further than Job. Job overcame, we can overcome. Job persevered, so can we. That is the story of Job, and that's who Satan really is. He's our inner struggle, our inner battle that we fight in dealing with tribulations and challenges. I hope just as Job succeeded, so too do we use Job as the paradigm, and we too find the ability to succeed. Marni, you back?
I'm back. Hi. So if Satan is the inner thoughts of us, then maybe is it possible that you could say that Satan is a part of God as well?
That's a good question. I think that everything in life is a part of God. The good, the evil, the death and birth. I think God's behind everything in life. The Talmud tells us one has to bless God for the good as one has to bless God for the bad. I mean, they're all from God. They're all part of God. And again, that's the challenge in our life, to be able to deal with challenge as we deal with blessing, to make blessings over death, as we make blessings over birth. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that we face on a daily level. I don't know of any greater challenge than how we deal with harsh and rough times.
Tali, do you have a question?
Yeah, so Meir, I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how the Nachash in Eden, the snake in Eden, relates to this model of Satan. Like, are those two things relatable, or are they just really separate?
I always thought that originally in the Garden of Eden, the snake was an external presence. And I think that after the catastrophe of the Garden of Eden, God realized that this outside presence is maybe too strong and maybe is too physical even. I don't know what he saw, but I think the system of struggle changed. I think Satan, or our evil side, the inclination or desire to suppress God and to deny God, one time was an external force. At this time, after the Garden of Eden, I think they become an internal force. I think that the role of Satan changed from external in the snake in the Garden of Eden to internal now, our inner presence, and evident by the story of Job. That's how I understand it.
Do you think that... Sorry, Marni, can I ask another one? You can cut me off. That's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So in my session, I focused a bit on strategies. How does the snake convince you that this really is an untenable situation? I'm interested in what you think about the different strategies in the two stories. Like, how does that change after Eden, or is it just different person from person? Like, what do you think about that?
I just came across the following idea just this week from the Rebbe of Radomsk, Shlomo Radomsk. And he says, do you know, often it's on top of the ark, and it's actually the first chapter in the Code of Jewish Law from a Moshe Israelist, Ramah. He writes as follows, that a person should always place in front of himself God. And he quotes the verse, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. Always place God in front of me. And he says that's the way righteous people live. So what does he really mean? So I saw a beautiful interpretation that the name of God given to there is the name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. It's the Hebrew letters Yud, followed by a Hey, followed by Vav, followed by Hey. And he says that verse, that idea is most prominent when we struggle, when we face trials and tribulations, because that's when we see God as the judge, God as the attribute of strict justice and non-merciful. And that is very, very difficult when we acknowledge God in that harsh, painful, judge-oriented way. That can hurt us and lead us down a bad path. So rather, what he says, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, place the name of God of Yud, K, Vav, K, that name in front of us, that name is the God of kindness, the God of compassion, the God of mercy. Whenever we're feeling down and we think God is being so strict and so difficult and so painful, so judgment-oriented, the trick then is Shiviti Hashem, is place the other side of God in front of me. Think about the compassion. Think about the mercy. Think about how good He is. So practically what that means is, if you're, let's give a very non-threatening, non-intimidating example. Let's say you're a passionate football fan and your team's struggles are getting you down and you're a little depressed. All you have to do is think about how good they were in past years. Think about how much kindness God bestowed upon your team in the last years. So more personal that would be is if God forbid one faces sickness or death in the family and he's thinking about the harshness and the strictness of God, the Elohim, the judgment of God. Think about the compassion of God, how much great He's given, how much blessing He's given you, how much positive He's given you. One always has to stop looking at X if it hurts and look at Y because it makes you feel better. It doesn't mean to close yourself off and not be aware of the difficulties. What it means is focus your attention. Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid means to place this attribute of God always in front of me. When I'm faced with difficult times, I have to remind myself that there's this whole compassionate and merciful side of God, and let that stand in front of me so I don't deny God and I don't give up on God and I still have Him as part of my life.
So do you think that maybe in the Adam and Eve story in the Bereshit passages that we were reading from, maybe the difficult time was Satan approaching Eden and saying, you should eat from the tree, and the way that she went about it was because she didn't exactly have that knowledge. Maybe she didn't have God in front of her. Maybe she went along with that difficulty because she was tempted by Him.
Unfortunately, I missed part of that. We were asking if she was missing some knowledge?
Yeah, because that's why she went along with what the serpent was saying, because she didn't have that knowledge. She didn't have God in front of her. She went along with difficulty.
Probably I would say that's probably I don't want to say the downfall, but I think everything we do wrong in life is because we don't place God in front of us. I think if a person truly, and I think this is really the challenge, if we're able to place God in front of us, we probably do nothing wrong in our life. But I don't think many of us walk around actually seeing the image of God in front of our face. Because if we did, but we'd be great people. We would be the most amazing people in the world if we always walked around with like the Google glasses, just the God glasses. We would never do anything wrong. I mean, think about it. If you had a video camera on you all day, you wouldn't do anything wrong. Certainly, if you had God's camera on you, you wouldn't do anything wrong. But I don't think we think like that.
Okay, so we have a question from Rachel, and the question is, can we blame God for everything bad?
Therein is the most difficult question of Judaism. My approach
is...
that's
what all of Job is about.
Right. I would say can we? I mean, from my perspective, I think we can acknowledge God for everything bad. I don't know if I would blame God for everything. My personal way I deal with difficult times is I say as follows. I say, God is there. God has watched. God has also decided not to intervene. God has, we call that in the Hebrew term, hastaras panim. He has turned his back. It's like when I'm teaching a class, I mean a real class in front of students, and I turn my back to them, they can punch each other. They can do crazy things to others. I'm not watching. I think God, so to say, lets things happen because at a certain time he turns his back and says, you're not worthy of my intervention at this time. So I think my approach is where I deal with difficult times in my life is I say, yes, God knows. Yes, God cares. At this moment, God has turned his back and let the thing happen. But everybody, I think, has their own way of dealing with it. Right?
Tali, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I want to put out a different model of dealing with that. What Meir suggested really works for some people, but for other people, it's really important to let yourself have room to be angry at God sometimes. And to, just like in a relationship with anyone who you really, really care about, to keep that relationship functional, sometimes they'll do something that hurts you. And they may have done it for good reasons, but you need to have room to say, I'm really angry and I'm really hurt right now and I need to tell you that. And I really want there to be room in our religious lives to also have that element. Not just of, I accept this, but of, I'm in a really close relationship with God, or I'm in some sort of relationship with God, and part of that is sometimes being angry at God for things that happen.
I agree with that. I believe that some stuff that happens in a person's life can be part of it, can be put on God, because that's part of the controlling factor in our lives. But on the other hand, I think some things happen for reasons, or some things happen just because they happen. God, we don't have any control over it. So I think that sometimes things just happen, and it can't all be put on God, but another time it just depends on the situation. So that's what I think.
I think that's a really, really useful way of looking at it. Meir, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, especially with this issue, I don't think that people should necessarily take what works for one person for themselves. I think with anything psychologically, it's internal. I think everybody has to decide for themselves, how do you handle difficult issues. I think the sign of a healthy individual is resiliency, is when things go bad, do you let it take control over you? Well, we'll call that the power of Satan. Or do you manage to rebound? Do you manage to pick yourself back up, get back on your feet? The verse says, Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. 7 times the righteous can fall and get back up every time. And I think each person has to go through life and figure out how he's going to do that. And I think as life goes on, I think in a teen year, there's less difficulty, less tragedy, less challenge. And as time will go on, I think you'll unfortunately find dealing with more and more difficult things. And everybody's got to find their own method. To be healthy mentally is to be able to deal with these issues.
I think that a lot of what we talked about also focuses on the idea, what Meir was saying, that we get so distracted by a single issue, a single part of our life, and that can become all-consuming, whether it's the things that, whether it's the bound themselves or the life when we're suffering. And that part of what these texts are pushing us for is to remind us in those moments to have a broader view of life, and to remember that you have a million tools within your boundaries, or that there have been a million other moments in your life, that what you're experiencing right now in this second isn't everything.
Agree.
Marni, any last thoughts?
I think that this is a really important message for us all to take with us in this class. Look at life with a broader spectrum. Don't take everything as good or bad, and just kind of live in the moment and figure everything else on your own, and don't always take one standpoint. And I think that's really important to take with us in the fact that we have to figure out our own paths along with listening to everything else that's happening around us.
Thanks so much, Marni.
Thank you, Marni.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming to our class. Thank you, Rabbi Tannenbaum, for helping us out, and also thank you, Tali, for helping us do this. Thank you, BBYO, for this experience, and thank you to the Global Day of Jewish Learning for giving BBYO the experience to hold this class. Also, thank you to BBYO's International Law 2015 for giving me the background to be able to do this, and the opportunity to meet Rabbi Tannenbaum and Tali. And so hopefully this class taught you a little bit something new about that maybe you didn't know about. So hopefully we'll see you this summer at Kala or at other summer programs. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.